Welcome to Boil the Frog Slowly, a radio program that goes where corporate media stops, where each week we ask the questions, are politics hazardous to your health? Are the decisions and incremental changes being made by government and industry creating health problems? What are they? Why don't you know about them? What can you do about it? Not only do we ask the questions, we furnish answers with unparalleled documentation, research, studies, and guests from around the globe with proof that unequivocally show that yes, politics are hazardous to your health, and you had better be informed before it's too late. Boil the Frog Slowly. A cute name? No. It's what's happening right now to you and me and the rest of the world as we placidly float in a slowly simmering pot of subtle changes. And those who hold the recipe to this agenda count on the fact that we won't notice the heat until we're sufficiently boiled, unable to resist. I'm Pat.
And I'm Sebastian.
And today we're stirring the pot. Thanks for joining us. Our guest today is Cindy Sage, the co-editor and principal author of the BioInitiative Reports, both in 2007 and 2012, and a founder of the International BioInitiative Working Group. For those who may not recall, the BioInitiative Report is the report on the relationship between the electromagnetic fields associated with power lines and wireless devices and health. Let me tell you a bit about Cindy. She is the owner of Sage Associates in Santa Barbara, California. Sage Associates is an internationally known environmental sciences consulting firm. The company specializes in translating complex technical and scientific information for the public and decision makers. Cindy's specialty area of practice is the science and public health effects of electromagnetic fields and radio frequency radiation, non-ionizing radiation, and I'm sure we'll talk about that in a minute. She was the co-facilitator of the Collaborative for Health and Environmental EMF group from 2006 to 2011 and is a full member of the Bioelectromagnetic Society. Well, I am so pleased and honored to have this conversation today, so welcome to our show, Cindy.
Welcome, Cindy.
Thank you so much, Pat and Sebastian. I'm really glad to be here.
Well, we're going to start off with the topic of wireless in schools and what's going on in the LA School District, Los Angeles School District, and so just bring us up to speed.
Great. Well, about a year ago, I became aware that the Los Angeles Unified School District was proposing to issue an iPad, wireless technology iPad, to every child in its district and to take every single classroom wireless with wireless access points that are, of course, necessary to provide the signal to make those iPads work. And I'd like to talk to you a little bit about how that has progressed over the last year and what some of the issues have been, but primarily what the wireless health risks are for not just students, but for teachers and for staff. But perhaps to give some context to the listeners on this subject about how current these decisions, how disconnected our federal government and our major school districts across the United States, like LAUSD, are in terms of understanding what these potential health effects are. Today I learned that the FCC, that governs public safety standards for wireless technology emissions, like Wi-Fi, has just approved $2 billion for Wi-Fi in schools. This means they're putting $2 billion up to promote wireless technologies in schools, ostensibly to teach children in technologically modern ways. And this is at the very same time that the FCC has had an ongoing review of the public safety standards for wireless emissions. Now, they've taken testimony over the last 6 months. Something like 90,000 pages of testimony have been submitted, much of it about the real risk for health, particularly for children, and the fact that the standards that the FCC today has on the books that are legal are not protective of public health. So here you have, just in one headline, a really good discussion about what the federal government is doing to move ahead to roll it out and throw money at it, while school districts are trying to make good decisions about whether or not to use wireless, and of course the money looks great. And then you have a huge contingent of scientists and public health researchers and members of the public who are saying not so fast, not wireless, just not wireless, not now. We don't know enough about health effects. So this is sort of an interesting way to open on a subject I've been working on for about a year that has been specifically to advise the Los Angeles Unified School District not to make this choice.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there are plenty of scientists presenting research, and they're giving very clear warning that the precautionary principles should be employed here. But what Pat and I are seeing locally and what we're hearing from sources nationally is that this wireless is just appearing in schools anyways, and it's happening basically through control of funding and manipulation through the purse strings.
Well, when you have a president that shows up, for a public opportunity meeting and, makes a presentation where he's saying, look, we should have Wi-Fi in every school, and the federal government is going to promote this. They're going to promote it through programs like ConnectEd, which is one of the initiatives that he's begun. It's very difficult for mid-course corrections to be made, and I think that there's very little recognition at the federal level among the agencies, or there's uneven recognition that we're looking at what has been classified health-wise as a possible human carcinogen, which is only part of the health impact of chronic exposure to low-intensity wireless like you will have in classrooms. We're seeing a really monumental shift in the way that children may be taught in the future. What is clearly emerging, and there's more than sufficient evidence to conclude that if you put a child in a classroom with chronic wireless exposure, even at these relatively low levels, this interferes with memory, with concentration, with attention, with behavior, with the ability to learn, to form long-term memories. So why would we change the environment of children and their classroom learning environment in a way that impairs their ability to do what they're there for, and that is to learn?
And Cindy, no one's taking into account, when you and I talked about this in the past, the layering effect. So these children now go home and they live in homes with wireless, and they've got routers, and they can't have to do their homework on iPads. So they're 365, 24/7, can't get away from it.
Yeah, well, I think it's important, Pat, for maybe us to build this out a little bit so people can begin to understand what the real implications are for this, and they're exactly what you say. Imagine that your child is in a school district where they're issued an iPad, not a wired computer. And I have to say, there are alternatives to the problems with wireless if we simply teach our children and give them all the advantages of new technologies through wired, cable modem, hardwired, hard-connected computers, as opposed to wireless anything, wireless mobile devices or wireless iPads. The problem we would not be here talking if that was what $2 billion was going to go toward. In fact, we'd be supporting it. But the problem is that these wireless iPads have a big footprint. First of all, if they're used in the classroom, children can't use them and teachers can't use them unless they have a fully laid out wireless infrastructure. So that means in addition to 20 or 30 wireless devices or iPads or some tablet like those working at all the little desks and the teachers, you also have to have these things hanging on the wall called wireless access points that feed the signal. And you have to have those in every classroom or every other classroom to have enough power and connection capacity to service everyone. And if too many, so you've immediately created an environment where you have wireless coming from the devices, wireless coming from the wireless access points. Now lay on top of that almost every electrified building in the United States either has a smart meter, a wireless electric meter, or will have one, unless we again make a large mid-course correction. You've got those sources everywhere you have a meter. And beyond that, outside you may have cell towers, stealth antennas for wireless communication and data transmission within the community that's very close. And then layer on top of that any AM, FM, or television broadcast facilities, some of which, reside in high schools and universities. They're on campus. So we have a layering up at school that is really many hundreds of thousands, millions of times beyond what the human body evolved with.
And Cindy, I'd like to add another layer to your collection there. How about the cell phone that's in every pocket of each one of those children and probably the teachers?
That would certainly be another huge, contribution, because even if they're not allowed to talk on them, but if they're on in the pocket or in the backpack, they're still emitting, intermittently to talk to the, hold hands with the nearest cell tower. So again, that's another layer. Maybe they have wireless security systems. Maybe they have wireless surveillance in these schools. I mean, when you really think about it, you can go deep and find many applications that are cumulatively very excessive. There are some studies I would like to talk about when we get into the detail of this, particularly because I provided them to the Los Angeles Unified School District more than a year ago. And they're contained within the BioInitiative 2012, and they clearly show that even when you're looking at general Wi-Fi and wireless that people live with in a residential area of a community, the levels may be down to the low, very, hundredth of a microwatt to a nanowatt per centimeter squared level, and yet people are still getting sick. They can't sleep. They're having immune disorders and the typical effects you see for chronic low-intensity wireless exposure. The levels within classrooms will be 100 times higher than that. The problem with epidemiology is that by the time you are able to, put in this infrastructure, expose children for 5 or 10 years, and then follow them up, the body in the street approach is really not very adaptive for kids. Right. My recommended action to the Los Angeles Unified School District and any other considering, district-wide Wi-Fi is that they will be placing hundreds of thousands of school children at risk for illness, learning impairments, and other health problems by choosing a delivery technology that produces a toxic emission. And radio frequency and microwave radiation are classified as possible human carcinogens. So it's really in the best interest of every district and its board and children, teachers, and staff, and so on. I mean, they're obligated to provide healthy and safe school environments that serve the purpose of learning. And they can do this by choosing wired rather than wireless technology systems. It's a very simple message.
Cindy, do the teachers have a voice in all of this?
They do. The LAUSD teachers are informing themselves now. There's a lot of advocacy work being done by some very good people who are concentrating on informing teachers. So it's a start, but it's a very, if you could see how the LAUSD has ramrodded this project along, they've simply ignored the growing calls for caution. LAUSD finally got into so much difficulty in rolling out its pilot program that they've delayed portions of it. And some of the things that have caused them to do that are wider than the health view. But let me tell you about the LAUSD's experience just in a nutshell, and then we can go back to talking in depth about some of these other issues. The kids that got iPads at LAUSD immediately disconnected the controls on the prohibited links. They're so smart. They knew how to do this. They unlocked the security features on the devices so they could use them to serve prohibited websites. Okay, so a couple of days later, the school district officials had to recall the iPads. They couldn't take them home. All right, so you've now issued a $700 plus expensive device that is harmful to health to students. They break in, use them for things they shouldn't be, and then you have to recall them, so they have no way to do their homework. Okay, that doesn't make sense. Kids were mugged on the way home because stealing iPads is even stealing better than cell phones. Mm-hmm. They're worth a lot of money. Wow. So what's the replacement cost? Who's going to pay for loss, breakage, theft? The cost of the program to LAUSD is more than $1 billion. Included in these very pricey $700 per iPad units, and I think they have 650,000 kids in the district. You can do the math on that, but that didn't even include the software. It turned out the software was an add-on, so that's another large budget item. And then beyond that, they found that these kids couldn't take tests on the iPads because they can't even see an entire problem on a screen. They're going to have keyboards. Keyboards are another $38 million. And keyboards are required by state, for state testing. So this was one mistake after another without, there wasn't competitive bidding, there wasn't informed, or educated, discussion about any of these points. What happens when that child goes home and they at some point are going to have to be able to take their devices home because they have to do homework? We've had families come to us who say, well, look, we don't like wireless at home. This would require us, this decision by a school district would require us to put a wireless router in at home so our child can do their homework, and we don't want to do that. We have other children. My wife is pregnant. We don't want wireless. So where does that leave a child? Having to stay after school or into the night on campus to use other wireless to get homework done.
Yeah, and Dr. Martin Blank pointed out in his recent book titled Overpowered that now it's becoming a trend to put Wi-Fi on school buses too, so the kids can get it at school and then on the bus, and then they get it at home from the router at home.
Right. So the layering up continues, and day and night. And again, when you think about the really big pieces of the wireless radio frequency rollout, you can see these are monumental. And Pat and I talked the other day about wireless in hospitals and for medical application, for electronic record keeping and so on. There doesn't seem to be a corner of the world any longer that isn't subject to these wild ideas for a new wireless application. When so many of these things could be done for learning and safety and medical treatment without the wireless.
Well, hospitals and schools really should be the last place this technology should go.
Right. One of the things that is emerging from the science, and it's been really well detailed in the BioInitiative 2012, Chapter 18 on fertility and reproduction, and that is that women who use cell phones or wireless devices during pregnancy have that in utero exposure for the fetus is beginning to look like causes changes in fetal brain development. This is really a revolutionary idea. How could a mom using a cell phone while she's pregnant affect the brain development of her unborn child? Well, it's beginning to look like, both from animal studies and human studies, that this is true. A study that was done on human mothers and children in 2006 reported that if a mother used a cell phone during pregnancy, that her child had learning and memory difficulties and behavioral problems that were very distinct, that could be diagnosed by the time the child was in elementary school. And this was followed up by Yale University research group. The study was ALDAD, A-L-D-A-D, et al., and a few years later, and they looked at mice, baby mice that were exposed in utero to cell phone radiation. And again, what they found was a very significant impact on memory, learning, behavior, anxiety levels, and so on. They said that baby mice looked like they had ADHD. Mm-hmm. And so we are getting very clear early warnings on this that we should heed. So where does that leave a pregnant teacher who is committed to being in a classroom for hours on end, during a pregnancy, or a nurse in a hospital? I mean, these are situations now that are today and real, and we will be seeing the result of these things that probably won't be in scientific study print for a decade.
Right.
Too late for a generation of children.
How can actual nations change their exposure levels and safety guidelines based on those BioInitiative reports, and the United States just ignores it? How is it that those reports are being absolutely, completely ignored by our government? Can you tell me what your experience is with this?
Oh, you bet. Yeah, that's almost another program, but let me try and do it in a short way. The European Union and its member nations listen to the World Health Organization as their primary advisor for health issues. And the World Health Organization turns to the IARC, or the International Agency for Research on Cancer, when they want to go test whether an exposure of some kind of chemical or EMF, RFR, causes cancer. And sure enough, after a lot of study, the World Health Organization, IARC, advised the European Union and Commission and the world that, in fact, radio frequency radiation as well as EMF, ELF, EMF, are both, there's enough evidence now clearly to label them as possible carcinogens. So they're now looking at, scientific evaluations of the adequacy of their public safety limits, which are very much like ours and very much out of date. So that process is going on. In this country, the FCC is looking, it's opened under great pressure from the General Accounting Office and, our federal leadership, and great public concern. The FCC has opened this, docket on, the adequacy of public safety standards for things like Wi-Fi. So it's going on right now. And in fact, we hope that there will be changes in the FCC public safety limits, so a lot of this stuff becomes illegal. The standards we have today are very old, and they only affect, they only deal with thermal effects, what burns and hurts you from radio frequency microwave radiation. They don't even begin to look at these low-intensity non-thermal effects that are clearly bioactive and clearly harmful. They're harmful in so many ways that it took the BioInitiative 2012 about 1,500 pages of hard science and public health to describe in every way which they're inadequate. So is the evidence there and sufficient? Absolutely. Before the Europeans and Canadians and everybody who follows ICNIRP standards, and in the United States where we follow the FCC IEEE standards. But here's where I found the disconnect for making for change. I just reviewed the latest attempt to review all the science under the wing of the European Commission health agencies. The Scientific Committee for Emerging and Newly Identified Risks, or SCENIHR, just conducted a major review of all the science to say, okay, we're going to take a look again. We looked in 2009. We're going to look in 2013. Has anything changed that would make us advise our governments to lower the standards? And the title of the report was Potential Health Effects of EMF, right, and RFR. Well, the committee came back with a preliminary opinion and said, no worries, no problem, all clear. The only way they could do it was to say they were looking for conclusive scientific evidence, not potential health effects as they were charged to do. Their directive from the commission was to look for potential health effects, which would trigger precautionary action, right?
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Well, they came back and they didn't answer the question they were asked to look at. They came back and they said, well, we can't find any conclusive evidence. And they dismissed everything that had been done in the last 5 years.
Wow.
So we saw this there, and I think we're going to see it again at the FCC. And I think that at that point, if we are not able to see major political and perhaps legal pressure brought on the system, that we will not see change.
Well, we're experiencing right now unprecedented times. I mean, we're seeing from the highest levels, this technology is literally being mandated and proliferated like it's never happened ever in history. It's being pushed into schools, hospitals, automobiles, and airplanes straight from the top. And this is all while these two FCC dockets are in play, and those would be the 13-84 and the 03-137. And I know the BioInitiative reports are on there, along with hundreds of other studies showing it's hazardous and the precautionary principles should be taken. But as we speak, it is being pushed from the highest levels into every aspect of our lives. So what's the answer here? Obviously, the FCC is not the answer. So do we have any other options than relying on a corrupt agency like the FCC?
Well, this is a little bit of a tangent, but over the last 5 or 6 years, I've done expert testimony to a number of federal agencies that have some tangent, relationship to this question. And, the FDA has been of very little help. They should be looking at health effects and advising FCC, but they're stuck in the past. I mean, David Carpenter and I went and actually made a presentation of the 2007 BioInitiative Report conclusions to the FCC, the Center for Radiological Health and Devices, or whatever it's called. And they blew us off. They actually made their public advisories to consumers worse after we shut the door behind us. So I don't have much hope there. But the Department of Justice that administers ADA, Americans with Disabilities, beginning to realize that with 20 or 30 million Americans that have medical and metal, M-E-T-A-L, metal implants, this is a real concern because we have people who have deep brain stimulators for Parkinson's that can't go out in public. They can't fly on airplanes. They can't use transportation. It's federally funded. They're beginning to care and they're beginning to take testimony about what we're going to have to do there. The Department of Energy, of course, has been, promoting wireless electric meters, but now they're finding that, state attorney generals are coming back and refusing to buy their arguments, and I think they're going to have to deal with states on this issue like they did with tobacco. They dealt with attorneys general on tobacco, where there is no benefit to what's being promoted. There's a human health cost, and there's no energy savings that DOE is really mandated to provide. So maybe some of these other federal agencies are going to be helpful in shining the light on why, if you take the full balance, the full balance sheet, the economic and health costs of wireless are so massive because they're so pervasive and they're effective at levels that we haven't seen in several years. We've gone beyond those. That the cost to roll back and say, whoops, wireless was a big mistake, a big corporate mistake, the costs are going to be enormous. And I think it's going to play out, but every one of us that has the ability to educate and influence our families and others in whatever, all politics is local in the end. If it's your school district, if it's your city council over a cell tower, if it's where you go for medical treatment, if you happen to be involved in transportation planning, if you're a professional, or medical planning, every one of us has the responsibility to get educated and then start making for change where we can.
You said something interesting that just sparked my thought. You said that we look at this in the future, look backwards and say that this was a huge mistake. Is it a mistake? Is this a plan?
Oh,
it doesn't seem like a mistake. It seems like a very calculated mistake.
It doesn't seem like all of these intelligent people are making a mistake.
If we were on a program like Coast to Coast, we probably would enter into that, is this a planned extinction? And I have just last week, I didn't review, I got a hold of a paper that was about the reduction in sperm quality and number of sperm and health of sperm and the male fertility issue related specifically to cell phone radiation. And the title was, it's a professional paper by, the professional research. He actually had a nice, fancy academic title to the paper, and then in parentheses it said, dial 1-800-EXTINCTION.
Wow, that's great.
People hear us ramping up in our level of concern, and this is a very tough thing for a lot of people when they turn on the radio and they start listening to so much, distress that we're talking about, and so much trouble. But sometimes you sit back and laugh, and I did the other day when I read that one of these new applications that has just come out, and the company that is putting out the product was so proud of it. Turns out that it is a wireless charging bench. So people can sit down on a bench that is radiating huge amounts of radio frequency radiation, so they don't even have to take their phone out of their pocket or purse to charge it. And I'm thinking, what is this doing to your gonads? What is this doing to your fertility? It has to be the stupidest idea ever.
I read about that at the ball stadiums.
At all sports stadiums now, football, basketball, baseball, all of them, they're now looking at putting these wireless Wi-Fi boxes under each seat.
Seats, yeah.
Every seat in the stadium will have this transmitter right where they're sitting.
So, that's not a mistake to me.
I published a paper in Pathophysiology a while back that talked about human health rights, and I had a short list of what really are human health rights. And if any one of them is violated, it should be enough to stop and make for change. And the integrity of the human genome is one of the line items on that list. Mm-hmm. The ability to sleep is on that list. The ability to reproduce is on that list. Yep. The ability to learn. These are all core human rights that are threatened at levels of radio frequency that we already see today, and that we're now planning to impose on our children without any thought for their future, or who will take care of these people.
Well, Pat and I sort of, beyond our talk show, we're sort of boots on the ground here locally. And she and I are both experiencing the same thing when it comes to trying to communicate with people about this issue. We're both just getting like a brick wall. People are really so addicted at this point, they don't want to hear about it. They literally just want to believe that it's safe because that's what they hear on the news and from the government, and it's so available, so it must be safe. What we're seeing is that, for example, putting it into schools the way it is, that's actually having a psychological effect on people that, well, Obama is personally putting this in schools, so it's got to be safe. And it's even actually making it more difficult for Pat and I to have this conversation with people because they just can't fathom that the government would put something unsafe in schools. So therefore, it has to be safe.
Yeah, well, let's talk about this addiction a little bit. When you look at the literature, very dispassionately, what you find is that Henry Lai and Narendra Singh and others have published extensively on the changes in the endogenous opioid system of the brain. That's the pleasure center, the addiction center of the brain. Radio frequency radiation lights up that center. And what this means is that radio frequency radiation from cell phones, cordless phones, or any of these devices is physiologically addictive, meaning it's not a dependency. It's not like I really, really like my iPad and I just want it with me all the time, or my iPhone. We're talking about physiological addictions that cause withdrawal symptoms, just like heroin, nicotine, alcohol, when you take them away from people. So we are. Can you imagine giving children or mandating children to take addictive chemicals or substances in school to addict them to this, while at the same time it's impairing their ability to learn and it's compromising their health? And it's, when you go down the line and you look at the chain of impacts, starting with why don't we give this stuff up, or why can't we get people to believe us? If you're already addicted, it's very, very difficult to pull back. And I can't even tell you how many children we see now that, including extended family members, whose kids won't interact with you at all at a family dinner or at a get-together or at a retreat. These kids are sweating, nervous, and white when you take their devices away.
Yeah,
I mean, this is a real calamity for people. And when you see camps that are set up, detox camps for children to try to break the habit because they're becoming non-functional people and they can't go to school any longer.
It's not just the children, it's their parents too.
I was just going to say that. How do you get wireless out of schools when you've got the parents who are addicted at home and they're already setting the bad example, or they don't believe, and so how are you going to get a hold of them?
They put that phone right in their kid's pocket.
Yeah.
Well, we the BioInitiative working group has come under a lot of fire from various quarters around the world for taking a hard line in 2007. I mean, it was unthinkable that we would come up with a tenth of a microwatt per centimeter squared recommended level for combined radio frequency outdoors, which means it's about a tenth of that indoors, or about 100th of a microwatt per centimeter squared indoors. And that's 5 years ago. The strength of the evidence in that 5 years between the first and the second BioInitiative was so strong that we dropped the recommended level for chronic exposure down 1,000-fold, a little bit more than 1,000-fold from that level in 2007. And it may not be low enough.
Right.
And I don't think our role in this, and again, I have to pull back a bit and say, look, we're here to provide you and the rest of the world with instant, free, downloadable, good quality science and public health from every point of view. We put everything in, all the positive studies. We don't cherry pick. We put in all the negative studies. We let people read and reason and then take that information out to make decisions. And our job is to read it and say, well, if this is, looking at this, the prudent person would then choose a level of exposure that would be very, very low. And you know our numbers. We've been heavily criticized for sticking to the science and not giving up and saying, well, it's too late because the numbers are already bigger than that. People are already exposed to more than that. And by the way, I don't want to give mine up. what I would say to those people is, okay, you choose your poison. Let's say you don't want to give up your iPhone, but you might make every other part of your life clean. And you won't inflict this on other people. And you won't inflict this on your children any more than you would smoking or alcohol until they're old enough as adults to make a choice.
Yeah, and the city of Salzburg in Austria, didn't they go along with your BioInitiative exposure guidelines? And
oh, yeah. They predated us with the 0.1 microwatt, and a year or two later they dropped, I think they dropped their level down to 100th of a microwatt even before our first BioInitiative report. But I haven't seen it. I mean, we're sitting back reviewing the science and coming to the same conclusion independently, which is nice reinforcement. Mm-hmm. But back to the LAUSD.
Yes.
This is the second largest school district in the United States. What they do matters, sets precedent.
Right.
And I really think that, I went back this morning and I looked at all of the downloaded news articles that I have in my files about, mostly from the LA Times, but other sources, talking about this, this saga, this journey that the district has taken and how much of a buzzsaw they ran into on many accounts, cost and safety and, hackability and, whether or not it's, going to help kids or not. And what I found is that it really has, the argument for wireless in schools with tablets has been demolished. And I think that every school district now that's considering it ought to stop in their tracks and be required, it ought to be required reading to read why that experiment has failed. It has failed, and for many reasons. And this is the kind of information that should be made in argument at every venue that you have. I would offer up, if you want to post my original letter to the Los Angeles Unified School District dated in February of 2013, it basically outlines all of the reasons health-wise why they shouldn't be doing this and why they're going to have to provide for special education children in special facilities anyway. Mm-hmm. You can't possibly think it's smart to put kids with learning disabilities, behavioral disabilities, that are already labeled, special ed, special needs. You cannot put them in wireless environments and expect them to do, it's so much worse for them.
Right.
You might as well shackle them, put them in a
Absolutely.
bag and throw them in the river with a chain. You can't do this to those kids. So there's a place to start. Every pregnant teacher ought to be able to opt out of wireless classrooms. So these are the beginnings of, discussion points where there's a lot of juice.
Well, how about another thing I find interesting in relation to schools and children is the autism link. Dr. Martha Herbert from Harvard has been involved with some very compelling studies, and just the data that she's compiled, I can't imagine.
You are aware that I'm the co-author on all those papers?
Yes, that's why I'm very excited to talk about this with you. Yeah, you are the authority to be talking to on this subject. Can you discuss with us some of those results from Harvard?
Yeah. Well, here's how it happened. When the BioInitiative was being updated in 2012, we added some new chapters, and I'd like to tell you what those are, and then I promise you we'll talk autism. There was so much information on blood-brain barrier effects that we needed to update that. We added a chapter on fetal and neonatal effects on babies, on fertility and reproduction, on effects on sperm and miscarriage, and so on. And then the last chapter was this very controversial chapter on whether autism spectrum condition, the biologic and the expressive effects, the core features of autism, look like people who have EMF RFR exposure. And I looked at that hard and decided that there was clearly enough overlap between what you see in people with autism and what you see in the EMF RFR literature that I contacted Martha Herbert and I said, look, you are an autism expert with a very wide view and a very broad following, and you're a pediatric neurologist. Would you like to partner and produce a chapter on this if there's really enough here? And it took quite a while with back and forth on the very vast, maybe 1,500 studies that we thought, were pertinent. And we ended up writing a chapter on autism and EMF RFR similarities. Not proof, not testing to see if you expose children in utero or in early life if they'll get autism, but looking at the similarities in the expression of things. What happens to people in autism? What happens to people with EMF RFR exposure? And it was so profound an experience and so rich and so broad to write up that I think we wrote about 40,000 words. And so it went into the BioInitiative, and then we immediately submitted it for peer review to be published in Pathophysiology. And they required us to put it into, two, part 1, part 2, because it was so long. But here you have 560 references, 40,000 words of very hard analysis of references that matter. And the conclusion is that there's more than enough evidence of similarity in the research that we should be paying attention, and it should be listed as one, not the only one, but one of the risk factors that matters. And there's particular urgency to it because of the numbers. I mean, in the time I've been working on it, I think we dropped from 1 in 250 children to 1 in 88 down to 1 in 50. In the end, after 40,000 words, I realized that most people would never read it, so I did a one-pager advice to parents of children with autism spectrum conditions, and then just an advice to parents. And you can reduce most of this to a one-page, and what it says is choose wired, avoid wireless for now. It's really what we can say, and it's well-footed in the research. Herbert would tell you that nutrition and a lot of the early environmental exposures are absolutely critical to look at in combination. So this is one more factor.
Yeah, I just recently spoke with a relative of mine who is a retired school official, like a department head level in the state of Oregon. And she said that back in 2009, their school had 17 autistic kids. And she said the next year they had 34, and then the next year they had 72. So she said there's got to be something to this. It has to be something in the environment that's causing this. And of course, that's before Wi-Fi was put into schools. So obviously, the 2009-10 time frame, that was around when I started having my problems with my smartphone because they went to 3G. Mm-hmm. So if you look at the proliferation of the next level generations in wireless technology and correlate that with the autism cases, it's like a mirror image with the increase in autism. So therefore, the parents getting exposed to their phones or their routers is what's causing the children to be born with these issues. And also, if it's an older child, then it has the ability to affect an older child as well. Yeah.
Well, it's really amazing. When perhaps there's a way for you to think about posting at least the abstracts from the Autism and EMF papers, because the biological plausibility, I think, is shown here, and the number of ways in which exposure to radio frequency disrupts the human body is really quite remarkable. It affects mitochondria, the immune system, causes neuroinflammation, actually inflames the brain. But beyond all, it causes changes in calcium processing in the body. These are all very fundamental, vital things that the body doesn't work very well when you start throwing a number of the metabolic processes.
And Cindy, these things happen to everybody upon exposure, and it's
That's
repeatable,
right.
Correct?
That's right. But what I really wanted to make as a point, and this is new, and this is really important, I think, is that we also have to be able to take in and think about the fact that a whole lot of what else is going on is the disruption of electromagnetic signaling and synchrony and sensory processing in the brain, in the nervous system. We are in fact detuning the brain. We are changing the brain and the autonomic nervous system, the electrophysiology, the function and the sensory processing. And this is probably why we see a lot of seizure disorders in children, sleep disruption, because when you change brain waves, when you add such a a system overload. You keep pounding on the nervous system with these very strong, to the body, very strong signals. They detune it, and everything stops. I like to say that what we've done is to chronically disrupt homeostasis. I have to say, Martin Blank and I went round for round in Selaton in Norway a few years ago when a lot of experts came together to talk. A lot of them were BioInitiative people, and then there were more. But I wanted to start with the fundamental concept that homeostasis is a civil right. It's a human right. Homeostasis means the body stays in balance. We have diurnals. We have a lot of up and down rhythms, but homeostasis means we always come back to our set point, and we're healthy. When you chronically disrupt homeostasis, and Martin would tell you heat shock protein happens, stress protein. And Henry Lai would tell you, well, genotoxicity, DNA is damaged. All these people will contribute to how homeostasis is disrupted. All of those things count. All of those are now BioInitiative science and public health chapters. But add to that the fact that we're detuning the brain and the nervous system, so people can't come back from the worsening challenges, from the biological effects of this if it is chronic. And what LAUSD, let's come back. In a classroom where you have chronic, daily throttling of the nervous system while you're trying to teach children, and you're making them sick, and you're giving them physical symptoms, you're detuning the brain, it can't learn. These are the things that we need to aggressively, not just investigate. I'm not calling for more research. I'm saying right now we know enough to say that we need new public exposure standards benchmarked to low-intensity, non-thermal levels that we know to be biologically disruptive, and we need very strong interim precautionary practices. And by that I mean no wireless in schools.
Right. Well, that's a huge way to think of this. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm so glad that you really do need to have some scientific understanding to understand the ramifications of this technology, and I really appreciate your sharing these scientific details with us, and it is easy to understand.
Well, let's think together, all of us, everyone who's listening, about where you have an opportunity. I would say a lot of the new technologies that involve a lot of, radio frequency through the air. For example, think of the energy savings and the reduction in radio frequency of Facebook disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to look at some of our sacred cows here that have developed overnight. I would say that, people sending photographs and large files and movies and things through the air, through radio frequency wireless, ought to stop. Mm-hmm. My personal feeling is that wireless was a colossal corporate mistake, and there is no safe with wireless. I don't think labeling, is enough. That's what we did for cigarettes, and they're still around. I don't think that we can take this, start with the small pieces and try to keep working at this because we'll be here in 100 years. But the human genome won't be anything recognizable. Mm-hmm. I think what we ought to do is look very hard at what we need wireless for that's really essential. It might be emergency services and emergency personnel, fire and police, and only for communication, not for big data transmission, and not this whole mobile mobile device, the shift to using mobile wireless everything is so unnecessary. It's for pleasure and entertainment and photographs and Facebook and all this stuff. It doesn't have to be. If you go to your wired computer and you want to send stuff on shielded wire so it's not hurting anybody, be my guest. It doesn't deal with the energy consumption part of it, which is horrible, but it would reduce down to the very basics, what we use a cell phone for and when we use it. It's like a AAA card when you're in trouble, or for a 30-second call and the device shuts off. What is the minimum amount of wireless that we could contract back to as a civilization and still have some benefit, but shunt or shift everything else, including educational technology, to hardwire? That's, in the end, I think, where I think we need to go.
I'm going to end it here because I think that's a great way to end our conversation. Let our listeners leave and walk away with that takeaway here is think about what your footprint looks like when it comes to using this technology and what can you do to reduce it, not only for your health and your families, but for humanity.
Yeah? Well, even the environmentally concerned people can look at the recent data that's shown each cell phone represents running a refrigerator all day long. So there is a carbon footprint to using your phone just for frivolous things like, as Cindy says, Facebook
Right.
and posting pictures.
Yeah, the energy consumption from all of these devices dwarfs any savings that we all thought we were making.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Well, Cindy, wrapping up, where can our listeners find out more about you and what you do?
You know, I don't keep a personal website anymore, but they can certainly access the BioInitiative reports at www.bioinitiative.org. And if you're interested in smart meters, wireless electric meters, we've done extensive computer modeling and health reports on those. If you Google Cindy Sage and sagereports.com, Cindy Sage plus sagereports.com, it will take you to a wealth of information on wireless electric meters and their health effects.
Cindy, you're awesome.
Yeah, you are the greatest, Cindy. It has really been an honor talking to you.
Well, spread the word, and thank you for giving us all a forum to reach people. Thanks so much.
All right, and thank you. Well, thank you for joining us on Boil the Frog Slowly Radio. Please come back next week, and for more information, go to the website boilthefrogradio.com. And until next week, remember to practice safe phone.
Boil the frog slowly, you're a frog in a pot. Turn up the heat and things will get hot. Will you jump out or will you burn? Listen to the show and you will return to Boil the Frog Slowly.